All right, everybody. It is 12 o'clock on the dot, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last Department of Medicine Grand Rounds of this academic year. My name is Ryan Abe. I'm one of the Inpatient Medicine Chief Residents here at Montlake. The start of the hour, I'd like to actually turn over the stage to my VA co-chief, Dr. Kevin Blau, who will present this year's Beeson Award.
Thank you, Dr. Abe. Give me one moment to pull up my screen. All right. So my name is Kevin Blau, and I'm one of the Inpatient Chief Residents at the Seattle VA. It is my great honor to announce the winner of this year's Beeson Award. Dr. Paul B. Beeson was a distinguished professor of medicine, spending his final years of practice at the Seattle VA from 1974 to 1981. He was a legend not just in our program, but in the field of internal medicine. He was best known for his extraordinary teaching skills and beloved for his incredible spirit. To quote Dr. Petersdorf, who was UW's chair of medicine during those years, Paul Beeson has taught us, probably more than anyone else in academic medicine, how to live the academic adventure fully, how to live it with humility and humor, with style and graciousness, and to live it with an understanding and kindness for his patients, his students, and his colleagues, in the spirit of giving to all of them more than he has received. In short, he has been the example of what the best in academic medicine is all about. In order to honor Dr. Beeson's legacy, each year an award is granted in his name to recognize outstanding clinical teaching by a faculty member who exemplifies scholarship, humility, compassion, and integrity. The winner is chosen solely by the Internal Medicine House staff. This year, many outstanding faculty members were nominated. The winner of the 2022 Beeson Award is a primary care physician at Harborview Medical Center. Originally from New Mexico, she received her medical degree from Harvard Medical School. She returned to the West Coast to complete her internal medicine residency training here at UW, followed by a clinician teacher fellowship. She currently serves as a clinical associate professor in the Department of Medicine. Her teaching contributions are too numerous to list here. Highlights include her current role as Associate Program Director for Educational Strategies and Director of both the Teaching Elective and the Chief Resident Education and Leadership Curriculum. She received the following comments from residents. She brings kindness and joy to her clinical care, teaching, and mentorship. She is a patient and enthusiastic teacher to learners at all levels. I'm inspired by her consistent advocacy for patients with challenging access to healthcare and social determinants of health. And she puts so much thought and effort into teaching trainees, but still manages to make it fun and enjoyable. I couldn't agree more with these comments. I myself have benefited from her incredible teaching and mentorship with her role as my assigned associate program director, as her role as my attending in adult medicine clinic, and our involvement in the clinician educator pathway. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to present the 2022 Beeson Award to Dr. Renata Thronson, which I would like to advance my slide for one moment here. There we go. And before I turn the microphone over to you, Dr. Thronson, I would just like to share an excerpt from your teaching philosophy that really resonated with me and also felt aligned with the type of educator Dr. Beeson has been described as. So I quote, "Powerful teaching moments occur without fanfare. They are quiet, personal, private. Over the recent years I have dedicated to the professional development of future educators, I've come to relish different moments of discovery, when novice teachers perceive leaps or baby steps of understanding in their own students or in themselves as teachers. I sometimes regret that my audience is growing because the audience of one remains most important." Congratulations, Dr. Thronson.
Thank you, Kevin. Those are beautiful and generous words. And I want to thank you so much for your 4 years of service to this program, not to mention the many hours you mentioned that the two of us have spent together teaching and caring for patients. And the same gratitude extends to our next speaker and all her fellow chiefs who are here to support her, and of course to the entire GITCU. I really, really mean this when I say that there is no professional distinction that could possibly mean more to me than this recognition from this world-class group of people. And if you only knew just how joyful and natural you make it for me to just show up for you folks, I worry that you might take away this award, but please don't, because it's really already one of my most treasured possessions. Thank you so much to you all.
Thank you, Dr. Blau, and congratulations, Dr. Thronson. It's absolutely well-deserved. Lots of accolades and congratulations in the chat coming through as well. I wanted to now pivot us today to our Grand Rounds talk. And it is my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce my good friend and co-chief, Dr. Linda Liu. Dr. Liu is originally from Toronto and went to medical school at the Pritzker School of Medicine at the University of Chicago. She completed internal medicine training here at UW and stayed to be the inpatient chief resident at Harborview Medical Center. She'll be moving back to Chicago for a fellowship in cardiology at the University of Chicago this summer. Dr. Liu's career interests lie at the intersection of equity and health policy. She served as a national board member for the Physicians National Health Program and currently is a policy fellow at Washington Healthcare Authority. She also served one of the executive chairs for the Resident Diversity Committee, spearheading multiple education and recruitment initiatives to increase equity teaching and resident diversity in the residency program. She has a passion for working to address systemic inequities faced by URM trainees in medicine, as well as for her future vulnerable cardiology patients on systems level. She'll talk to us today of the talk titled A Reckoning of Our Values Towards a Diverse and Inclusive Future in Academic Medicine. And as a reminder to those in the audience today, please post your questions in the chat and I'll pose them to our speaker at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will turn over the stage to Dr. Liu. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Abe, for the wonderful introduction, and congratulations to Dr. Thronson as well. I was getting emotional before my talk. I'm going to just go ahead and start sharing my screen. There we go. Okay, and all right. Thank you everyone for joining. I am incredibly honored to be presenting at the University of Washington Department of Medicine Grand Rounds today on a topic that I think is become near and dear to my heart. And it's specifically titled A Reckoning of Our Values Towards a Diverse and Inclusive Future in Academic Medicine. And so I'm just going to jump right in. Oops. Sorry, my computer froze there for a second. There we go. So I have no disclosures. So the objective at the end of this talk is that I hope that everyone will be able to appreciate the current disparities in physician diversity within academic medicine, and then surmise the reasonings behind a leaky pipeline and discuss strategies to mitigate and improve physician diversity in academia. And finally, I'm hopeful that participants here on the chat will be able to broaden our definitions and valuation of what success means and is within academic medicine. So before we get started, I want to first align us all to a shared understanding of diversity. And, I think there are many definitions or ways to kind of interpret what diversity means, but this is the one that I feel most succinctly kind of summarizes the essence of this talk. And so diversity is the sum of differences from the lived experiences of those around us. Improving diversity involves appreciating the differences of values, perspectives that are both shaped by identities that we hold and present to the world. Though often when we speak about diversity, it's brought up in the context of numbers. However, I don't think diversity is a quota in and of itself. We use numbers to approximate the presence of diversity, but satisfying a number or quota alone would not challenge the underlying forces and cultures that work against diversity. Instead, I believe this perspective, this inclusive, qualitative look at diversity, can then allow the numbers to follow. And this is the perspective that will underline the remainder of my talk. And so jumping right in, the world is getting more diverse. It's predicted by 2050 that 50% of the United States Census will identify as non-white. It's also been long inserted that having a physician workforce that represents our patients benefits patient care. Evidence has demonstrated that minority patients seek out physicians of their own race out of personal preference or language, and report higher levels of trust, which ultimately leads to improved health outcomes and greater overall satisfaction. Diversity also enriches our own lives, enhancing creativity and understanding and empathy between us. That being said, academic medicine has a diversity problem. To further illustrate this, we can take a look at the workforce diversity disparity in fellowships. And so the proportion of women in United States medical schools has been rising for the last few years. And in 2019, women for the first time represented the majority of medical students in the United States, about 50.5%. Now, while the total percentage of women in US medical schools has made significant strides, the percent of women in many internal medicine subspecialties continue to have significant disparities. So here's some data that was presented from the ABIM on the percent of first-year fellows who are female by subspecialty, showing the trend for the last decade. And so here on the x-axis, you can see the years, and then on the y-axis is the percent of women fellows, first-year fellows within different subspecialties. This dotted black line here represents the 50% mark. And I think it can become quite evident that many subspecialties fall below this 50% mark of women and have a significant disparity in the number of women that they have in their subspecialty. Now, I'm going to be a cardiology fellow in Chicago in just a few short weeks, so I'm going to be picking on cardiology quite a bit here in this presentation. But as you can see, the percent of first-year female fellows entering cardiology has remained pretty stagnant around a low 20 percentile for about a decade. Now, while there are overall small improvements in certain years, there is still significant gender disparity within multiple subspecialty fields. And certainly the rate of improvement from year to year to match the proportion of women in the general population has not been fast enough. And we all know that these trends for fellowships are important because fellowships are often seen as a major gateway for recruiting trainees into the academic medicine pipeline. Now, perhaps the data on existing disparities within certain internal medicine fellowships may not surprise you, but what may be surprising is the extent of how little we believe there's a problem. So this is, again, picking on cardiology, I'm sorry. This is a paper published by the Journal of American Heart Association by Dr. Quinn Capers, and this was published about 2 years ago now. And this paper looked at the perceptions on diversity within cardiology. And so they surveyed about 110 program directors and associate program directors, which represented about 57% of the United States adult cardiology programs. And here are two of their main findings that I would like to highlight. And so they found that about 31% of cardiology fellowship program directors that responded to their survey are uncertain or do not believe that physician diversity enhances quality of care. Furthermore, about 63% of cardiology fellowship program directors survey respondents did not think that diversity needed to be increased in their own program. Now, with regards to this second point, if we go back a slide and remind ourselves about the 20% of female trainees within cardiology within the last decade and how this number has not particularly changed very much in the last few years, these findings become a little bit stark and seem a little bit wrong. So not just to pick on fellowship, but these disparities and the patterns that probably generate these disparities persist well into faculty as well. And so this is a bit of an older study. This is published in JAMA in the year 2000, but it was kind of the landmark study that looked at racial or ethnic disparities in faculty promotion within academic medicine. And so Fang and al. Basically, they evaluated the data from the AAMC's faculty roster system of over 50,000 full-time medical school faculty that were at the assistant or associate professorship level. And their outcome of interest was the attainment of associate or full professorship stratified by race by the year 1997. And their outcomes they found was that after adjusting for various variables, underrepresented minority faculty remained less likely to be promoted compared to white faculty. And this was they generated a relative risk ratio of 0.68% with a significant confidence interval for assistant professors and a relative risk ratio of 0.81% for associate professors. Now, that data is a little bit old, so more than a decade later, another study was published in 2013 on minority advancement within academic medicine. And this time it looked at the AAMC medical school faculty roster data again from the year 1997 and until 2008. And what they found was, again, ongoing disparities in gender and race at each academic rung within the last 12 years since the last study. And so here's a chart from that study representing the average 12-year racial and gender representation. And so it's not the best chart ever, so I'm going to orient you guys. So here on the x-axis, you see the different kind of academic rungs, so instructor all the way up to chairperson with the professorships in between. On the y-axis is kind of percent proportion of people within each rung. And then the rungs are stratified by race and gender. So it's hard to see, but the general findings from this study showed that the proportion of white faculty or male faculty, so this white bar here and this lighter gray bar here, the white faculty and male faculty, the proportion of them increased respectively at each rung on the academic ladder as we go higher up. Meanwhile, the proportion of women, so this darker gray bar, and minority faculty, which are highlighted here in these dark colors, decreased respectively at each, in proportion at each rung on the academic ladder. Moreover, while the authors found that they did find that the total proportion of white physicians in academia has decreased over the last 12 years, representing some increased diversity with non-white physicians in academia, the rate of change within 12 years was quite low, especially as you got to higher rungs of the academic ladder. So for example, at the full professorship level, with regards to proportion of Black physicians in the full professorship level, the absolute change in percent within 12 years was 0.15%. And so starkly, the authors noted in their discussion when reviewing these results, if we were to assume a linear rate of change at this percent change, then at this rate, it would take nearly a millennium for the percentage of Black professors to mirror the percentage of Black people in the general population. In another study published in Academic Medicine, the study authors did competing risk methodology and used this to identify variables associated with promotion or attrition of newly appointed full-time instructors or assistant professors at accredited medical schools in the US. And what they found when they stratified by, when they did this, when they looked for the variables, they found that underrepresented minority faculty were more likely to be associated with lower tenure probability of promotion and higher tenure probability of attrition. So here in this again, not the best graph, but this is by race, and this dotted line represents underrepresented minority faculty. And you'll notice that there is a lower rate of promotion compared to white faculty and a higher, more likely chance of attrition compared to other faculty. Similarly, when they stratified by gender and sex, they found the same thing, where women were more likely to have a higher rate of attrition and a lower rate of proportion when compared, promotion when compared to men. So, in conclusion, there are persistent race and gender disparities within the demographics of fellows and academic faculty, as well as inequity in academic advancement in the academic medicine pipeline. But why does there remain a persistent disparity over all of these years? What are the factors that are causing this and leading to this persistent disparity? Now, one often proposed mechanism is the underfilled or empty pipeline. In fact, in a study on the perceived barriers to advancement in academic medicine, which was published by JGIM in 2021, the authors did semi-structured interviews of 64 faculty members at a medical school. And they found that study participants who were interviewed and identified in the grouping of being majority men tended to believe that the lack of underrepresented minority faculty in leadership was due mainly to pipeline issues. And so one participant was actually quoted as saying, there just aren't enough qualified minorities for these jobs, just not. There aren't enough qualified people out there, totally a pipeline problem. And so when I think pipelines and pipes, I think Super Mario. So forgive me, well, as I'll be using images of Mario characters for an analogy. But the pipeline is empty is the general concept that the lack of minorities or women or other underrepresented groups at higher levels of academic advancement is due to the initial small pool of candidates. Now, I don't disagree, as the underfilled or empty pipeline certainly has been demonstrated to be a factor that underscores the disparities we see in physician diversity. So for example, per the AAMC in 2018, Black or African-American matriculants made up about 7.1% of matriculants to US medical schools, compared to 13% of the US population. So the reasons for a small initial pool of candidates in the pipeline are certainly numerous and relate to many socioeconomic inequities and bias, and increasing this initial reservoir is paramount to improving representation. However, this is not the scope of this talk. What I'd like to focus on for this talk is how a leaking pipeline is leading to disparities in diversity in academic medicine. And in fact, I personally think the word leaky pipeline is too passive when describing what's going on. So rather than just leaks, there are also blockages contributing to the disparities that we see. So the leaking pipeline. This is just a slide of different study paper titles that talk about this leaking pipeline. So to orient you all to the leaks. So what we know about the leaks so far is that the data has shown that women and minorities are leaving academic medicine. As we look at this prior data here, we notice that there's a higher rate of attrition or probability for attrition by being a woman or an underrepresented minority. Furthermore, we also now know from the data that disparity worsens as you increase in the academic ladder rung, especially for underrepresented groups. So why is it leaking then? In the review of the literature on barriers to academic advancement, two themes emerged as causes for a leaky or blocked pipeline: themes of opportunity and themes of tenability of the environment. And now what I mean by that is, for opportunity, is what are the qualifications or values being selected for during opportunities for advancement in the academic medicine pipeline? Are those qualification standards too narrow? And what unique barriers limit opportunities for underrepresented groups to advance in this pipeline? And then when we think about tenability, what I think about is the status quo environment equitable and conducive to academic advancement for underrepresented groups? And so we're going to explore these two themes in greater detail. And so how we're going to do that is I'm going to pick on cardiology again and take a look at fellowship admission into cardiology as an example of the theme of opportunity as being a reason for why there's a leak, or the lack thereof opportunity as being a reason for why there is attrition or a leaky pipeline. And we're going to use this example to see if we can better answer the question of what qualifications or values are being selected for, and are these qualifications or standards too narrow? So referring back to the study we looked at earlier, where they did a survey to cardiology program directors, they also asked the cardiology program directors what their top 3 criteria were when considering ranking candidates for cardiology fellowship. And so here is a chart showing the responses with the % of respondents who considered one or more of these criterion a top 3 priority. And so clearly you can see at the top, there's this idea of clinical skills and acumen being very important for many program directors. This idea of ability to fit in or being a team player, and then research productivity. What I think is interesting is that at the bottom of importance are these, what appears to be less valued is demonstration of qualities of humanitarianism or compassion, evidence of commitment to society, and then diversity or ability to enhance. And then what goes along with that is the cultural competency of fellows. So let's look at some of those values that they identified in more detail. What is valued? Well, one of the things that they identified in that particular study, and I think in general for most fellowship programs, is this idea of research. Research is often cited as an accomplishment and experience that is objective and valued for application, and particularly in the faculty realm, because research productivity is a major factor for promotion within academic medicine. However, we know there is a lack of mentorship for underrepresented groups. Mentorship is an essential presence to guide and sponsor publishing and research productivity. This may make research more inaccessible for underrepresented groups. Moreover, there's this concept of a minority tax, which may limit your time and compete with time for research productivity. And we're going to talk a little bit about this more later about what minority tax means. Still, research productivity is often used by fellowship directors to rank applicants, as there's this thought that it directly correlates with interest in the research as an academic career and thus academic achievement. And however, because of some of these just described access issues, this may not be the most accurate proxy for interest in research as a career. In fact, a study by Prasad et al. Demonstrated that research publications at the time of application are actually poor predictors of publishing in the long term, which may suggest that publications at time of application are not a good proxy for research interest and potential. Okay, let's look at another value, another criterion they listed. So they said clinical acumen. So clinical acumen is absolutely important for clinical excellence as a physician. However, the way in which we currently assess this nebulous term of what clinical acumen means, particularly for underrepresented groups, are fraught with bias. And this factor must be taken into account when assessing fellowship applicants. In fact, there is numerous studies done on the race or gender bias in clinical rotation evaluations. So for example, studies have documented racial and or ethnic disparities in medical student performance evaluations in the summary words that they're used, with fewer standout descriptors for Black students and lower clerkship grades despite equal performance on clinical clerkship final written examinations. And these biases persist and perpetuate throughout training. Moreover, and what is usually seen as tangible measures of overall clinical excellence, like AOA status or USMLE scores, these are also usually fraught with bias. And so many of you may know about the 2017 JAMA Internal Medicine paper, which looked at AOA membership stratified by race, which found that Black and Asian medical students were less likely than their white counterparts to be members of AOA, even after controlling for USMLE scores, research productivities, community service, leadership activity. Similarly, USMLE scores are placed with high importance for admissions. However, their use as a proxy for clinical performance is poorly demonstrated. In fact, what USMLE step performance has been demonstrated to correlate with was further performance on subsequent licensing exams, rather than clinical excellence or acumen. And so if those are the things that are valued, then what is devalued? And I really want to go back to a reference statement that was from that original landmark paper by Feng et al. That we talked about earlier on the disparity of academic promotion for minority faculty. Specifically, in thinking about the factors that underlie the observed disparity, the authors said, they may be encouraged to review promotion criteria that may place too much emphasis on basic research and undervalue contributions in education, administration, and community service often made by minority faculty. So let's talk about those things that are devalued. What is not as often cited as important individual factors for selection in fellowship or other academic advancements are these things: equity, diversity, inclusion activities, community engagement, institutional engagement, teaching. This devaluation actually disproportionately affects underrepresented groups in the selection process. So, for example, among faculty who spend time doing research, underrepresented minority faculty were twice as likely as non-underrepresented faculty, about 33% versus 17%. They're twice as likely to report that most of their research could be categorized as disparity research. And minority faculty also disproportionately represented in institutions' diversity efforts. And these diversity-related pursuits have been felt in the past in studies that have done evaluating minority faculty perspectives. These diversity-related pursuits have been felt to be devalued and not taken seriously as promotion-earning activities, as reported by recent qualitative interview studies on minority faculty. So I mentioned earlier, this concept of minority tax. The disproportionate engagement with health disparities or diversity activity in general is colloquially known as minority tax. And so the kind of definition that we're using for minority tax is the tax of extra responsibilities placed on minority faculty in the name of efforts to achieve diversity. And so in reality, the way that this tax may manifest is complicated and actually occurs in several different domains, and some of which I've described here. So for example, in the diversity efforts disparity domain, where minority faculty may feel an obligation to the communities they represent, to the future generations of minority students. As a result, they choose to spend more of their time working in community efforts, and they're often asked to take on committee work in this area of diversity. So they're spending more time, oftentimes uncompensated, mentoring, recruiting, etc. Minority tax also affects this racism isolation disparity domain. So racism has been named as an issue, as a reason that underrepresented minority faculty feel that they have to constantly prove their value, prove their worth and their ability, thus diverting their energies from more meaningful activities. As a result, underrepresented minority faculty have reported feeling excluded, invisible, isolated, and a poor fit. They report that this sense of belonging to the institution is essential for success and career satisfaction. And this emotional distress, this constant need to prove yourself in these environments is a form of taxation, as it takes this emotional energy and time that is necessary to kind of counteract those feelings that other non-underrepresented groups may not face. So returning to our two themes, we discussed the way that the lack of opportunities can lead to a leak or disparity in the pipeline. And we discussed both the kind of qualifications and values that are being valued and devalued. And we also talked about the unique barrier of a minority tax potentially limiting opportunities for underrepresented groups. Now, I want to talk about the other theme, this theme about tenability. And so more specifically, if the current status quo environment and culture is tenable, is it equitable, and is it conducive to helping prevent academic advancement disparity? And as you may gather from my talk, the answer is probably no. And so let's talk about that a little bit more. So again, picking on cardiology, I'm so sorry to my future field. As we've already elucidated, there are significant gender disparities within cardiology, with only 20% of female trainees in the last decade, with the numbers diminishing as you go up the academic ladder rungs. And so in looking at the barriers to sealing the leaks in the pipeline for women in cardiology, this study by Cater et al. Identified the following potential challenges drawing from surveys in women in this field. And in red, I've circled the challenges that appear to most pertain to a work culture environment that is untenable for a more diverse workforce, including perceived work-life imbalances, discrimination, and workplace culture. So in fact, to illustrate that further, there was actually a recent paper that was published by Gulati et al. In JACC that looked at describing the experiences and impact of childbearing on women cardiologists and their careers. And so in this study, they sent a survey to 323 respondents who had been pregnant as a practicing cardiologist. And what they found was quite astonishing. And so what they found in their survey study was that 23% of cardiologists did not have paid maternity leave. About 37% took extra service or calls prior to their maternity leave. 37% reported pregnancy complications as a result. 51% reported their pregnancy adversely impacted their career. And 41% experienced a decrease in salary. It's evident from this study that the field of cardiology, which is currently a male-dominated field, has not yet developed an environment that is equitable enough to allow for the success of a more diverse gender workforce, as childbearing was not only seen as a career detriment, but also led to the increased risk to their health during pregnancy. And so I think this one quote published in Circulation from an editorial describing the leaking pipeline for women in cardiovascular medicine and research kind of summarizes this point well as well. And it says, women have been expected to adapt to the organizational structure and culture of medicine and science built largely by and for men. Until men recognize why women are needed in medicine and science and accept responsibilities to similarly adapt the organizational structure and culture to meet women halfway, the playing field will never be level. I think this whole example, while it is only one example, is a great illustration of the fact that in order to eliminate the pipeline disparity and increase retention and recruitment of diverse peoples, the work environment needs to mold and be flexible in order to create an equitable environment that would allow its diverse workforce with diverse and different needs to thrive. And so then, speaking of, how do we make them thrive? How do we fix the leak? How do we fix this leaky pipeline? And I think the answer to this is nuanced, and there's many different angles you can take or tackle. But overall, what I think needs to happen is a deeper, more philosophic conversation on our values within academic medicine. If we return to our shared understanding of diversity that I shared in the beginning, that diversity is the sum of differences from the lived experience of people around us, and understand that it is these differences that can enrich our own lives as well as the care of our diverse patients, then we will prioritize the added value of diversity in our physician community. And to do that, I think we will need to shift our priorities, elevating the attributes and experiences that may have been currently or previously undervalued in academic advancement. Things like service to our communities, service to our patients, and to each other in our institutions. So how do we fix the leak? Normally I would say call a plumber. That's why Mario's there. But in thinking back to the two themes of opportunity and tenability, here are some actionable suggestions. To promote better opportunity for recruitment and retention of diverse persons during selections for academic advancement, whether that be at the fellowship level or further down the professorship pipeline, I think we need to first recognize the presence of workforce disparities and how there are many factors that lead to their propagation. When evaluating people for academic advancement, broaden your definition of academic success, including valuing experiences and characteristics that may have been previously undervalued, including work in diversity and equity and inclusion sphere, or leadership and volunteer commitments in service to patients and institutions. These are activities that are time-consuming, but their participation often exemplifies the many characteristics that we value in excellent clinicians. Recognize that while research and traditional measures of clinical and academic success in medicine are important, these may be fraught with bias, and as we discussed, are not necessarily proxies for the qualities we are looking for with regards to academic advancement in research. And to really drive that point further home, consider focusing less on research efficiency and productivity for trainees specifically, such as number of publications, which may encourage hoop jumping, and to which have not also been not necessarily correlated with longevity in research, but rather more on the quality of curiosity and questioning, which may signify a growth mindset of a candidate that is more inherently suited to a career in scholarship and academia. You can imagine that if you had two candidates, one who's done an amazing job, worked very hard, and published many different case reports, they may on paper look more impressive in their passion for research than another candidate who came up with a research question on their own, was passionate about that question, started the project from beginning to end, and may not yet have necessarily published on that particular question at the time of their application. I think you can see that both candidates may have some merit with regards to having drive for research, but one candidate on paper may not seem as interested as another. Now, with regards to tenability and making an environment that is equitable and conducive to a diverse workforce, Leadership should review policies that can influence culture within a program within a program and specialty, and assess for the presence of equity to support diverse workforces with diverse needs. I recognize that this is a rather large and challenging and daunting task, but it's something that we as a community of physicians should strive to do and think about together. More specifically, particularly for folks who are not part of underrepresented groups, considered helping to combat the minority tax by offloading the substantial but important work needed to help improve diversity. And so this includes intentionally seeking to mentor trainees from underrepresented groups. There's also this idea of sponsorship that has emerged in this leaky pipeline literature, which is the idea of actively elevating these individuals along their path through the pipeline. And then also actively participating in institutional equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts, as improving equity, diversity, and inclusion should be a priority for all of us in order to create healthy, diverse, and inclusive environments that will benefit all members of the academic community and improve healthcare. So as a final note before the end of my talk, I'm reminded of the mission statements from all of our medical schools. I vividly remember reading these mission statements as a pre-medical student in an attempt to try to distinguish the values of each institution I was applying to. Now, what I remember is that indeed proved to be a very challenging task. And that is not a total knock on these medical school mission statements, but instead, I think a testament to the shared values of what we as a collective of physicians have agreed are important in the care of patients. So here is University of Washington School of Medicine's mission statement. And what we'll all notice is that the first thing they write is committed to excellence. And I think that perfectly summarizes and exemplifies how excellence as clinicians is a broad definition that encompasses many experiences and characteristics. Further down, they write things like their goals of advancing knowledge and assuming leadership in the biomedical sciences and academic medicine. I think this reminder again to remember that we should be committed to a broad understanding of success, so as to appreciate and elevate the differences in interests and goals that will ultimately enrich the practice of medicine and patient care. I want to briefly acknowledge some of my friends and co-chiefs who really helped me kind of discern some of these topics and ideas over the year. Many of my co-chiefs, Ryan Abe, Hannah Oren, Shri Jasula, my friend Shirlina Rovi, and then of course my mentors at Harborview, Dr. John Sheffield and Dr. Bob Harrington, and really appreciate their help in helping generate this talk. And finally, I'll leave you with this slide from one of our leaky pipeline papers that kind of illustrates this idea that, yes, while there is a pipeline issue and that we should absolutely be working to increase the reservoir of diverse individuals entering our pipeline into academic medicine, to expand the pool of physicians and biomedical scientists, we also need to fix the leaks in the pipeline where we have talented individuals leaving academic medicine or not having the opportunity to advance. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions or thoughts and comments. Thank you.
Dr. Liu, I want to thank you for such an important talk, and we are so sad to see you leave the UW, but Chicago is so lucky to have you join their fellowship, and also want to say leave it to a future cardiologist to resonate with the piping problem, right? So we have time for a couple of questions here, and so please pose them in the chat. I think actually, Linda, this talk is particularly salient, I think, given the recent sort of like failed DEI legislation in the UW Faculty Senate this month that would have allowed consideration of EDI work for academic promotion here. I wonder if you have any thoughts about sort of that ruling, or if you are familiar with what happened in, at the institutional level for our own institution.
Yeah, no, I actually wasn't aware of this, so thank you for keeping me up to date on this information. I think it's just kind of illustrating again this idea of valuation, and what's important as what have we determined as an institution as an important value to defining academic success and advancement through academia. And I think, not explicitly and intentionally including equity, diversity, inclusion initiatives kind of speaks to that, what we were saying earlier, that there's this devaluation of these activities. And particularly these activities tend to be done by many faculty who they themselves identify as underrepresented individuals within the program. And then you get this idea of, minority tax of, there's only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so many things that you can focus your time and attention to. And if that's something very important to you, you're going to focus your time towards that and may not be able to have the time to do the other things that may help advance your career in an institution. And so I worry that the implications downstream of that is that there is this uncompensated work that is going on of our many already underrepresented faculty members, and that is not going to be in play to help advance them in their career when they're spending the majority of the time doing that. And so I would hope that moving forward, this is kind of the purpose of my talk in doing this is a bit of a call to action to all of us to start thinking about these things and thinking about what we value in academic medicine. And I know for sure, as someone entering a male-dominated field as a minority woman, that is a daunting task, but it's something that I think needs to happen in order to encourage further individuals to be able to see themselves in careers where they may not have seen themselves before.
I was also quite struck by some of the data that you showed about sort of the advancement academic promotion of women in URMs, and thinking too about this recent vote that happened, how, we as instructor level or whatever are actually not allowed to vote in these types of things. And so if you're having less people who are further along who are deciding on these things, it some ways is not surprising that these types of initiatives do fail. And that is also concerning because, we can't make change unless we allow those people to have a voice.
Yeah, right. And you're absolutely correct. I think that's the part that's challenging, and really comes back to this idea of really, what are our values? Do we think that diversity within academic medicine in general has virtue? And for me personally, I think it does, not just for our patients, but for ourselves. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And that's really what I hope to convey with this talk.
I wonder if you have any examples from your personal experience of ways that institutions or even programs, smaller departments have been able to sort of move the needle a little bit towards actually promoting diversity truly in the true sense of the word. And that could be examples for all of us to learn from potentially.
I mean, the first one that came to mind was the paper I worked on with you, right? On how to.
It wasn't a plan, I promise.
Yeah, no, I know. But chief resident diversity, one thing that we talked about a lot was this idea, chief residency, much like fellowship, is a kind of stepping stone into academic medicine, a dipping of the toe in the lake of academic medicine, if you will. And I think within there, some of the things that we're thinking about in recommendations is you really want to counteract the many forces that are in play that are leading to a disproportionate or bias in the academic pipeline. And many of those things include, like we mentioned, implicit bias in general. And so standardizing, I didn't talk about this in depth, but standardizing the application process and really, really honing in and defining the qualities that you are looking for when you are standardizing these concepts. So for example, if you find that growth mentality is important for you, making sure you're asking standardized questions regarding growth mentality and assessing the answers from applicants on growth mentality as a way. And I think if you take that perspective, then your numbers will follow. And I think that's really the kind of point I really wanted to convey, is that you need to take this perspective of diversity. It's not quota, it's not numbers. It is truly this understanding that what are your values? What are the values you have in your people that are applying? What do you want to promote? And things like growth mentality, as opposed to necessarily just like the number of papers you have on a CV, may better illustrate the kind of qualities that you actually want to advance in your institution. So please check out that paper. It's published by Ryan. It has many recommendations for how to improve. I think Dr. Cornea might have put it in the chat just now, but as many recommendations on how to improve diversity amongst chief residency. And one of those, again, is that one of the recommendations we also included in there was, really placing high value and emphasis on things that are not traditionally, seen as valued in academic pipeline. Oh, maybe not. Innovative pipeline.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, awesome. I'll put it in the chat for everyone else to see too. I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate here with you, Linda. I wonder what you would say to folks who sort of say, well, we as an institution, we value research and publications, for example, because that's where our source of funding comes from. Like, we can't run our hospital or institution unless we are bringing in NIH dollars. And so we need to value these other things that are competing priorities to truly like valuing diversity and activities related to that. So what do you say to those people, and how can institutions kind of address that external pressure that exists on all different levels of academic medicine?
That's such a great question, Ryan. And I think, the way I think about it is maybe it's a chicken or egg situation, but money and priority, right? What are your priorities? And so I will say that this idea that, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives or scholarship is not profitable or not important, I think is short-sighted. And I think you and I were talking about this before, specifically, or many, many months ago. But the idea that, diversity, as our patients become more diverse, and research and wanting to care for these patients is not important, I think is very short-sighted. I think if we as a community and as a culture and as a society decide that, diversity and equity, and I think there's many conversations about this going on in the general public, that diversity and equity are important and social justice is important, then the research money and dollars will follow. And I think, this question, and I think about this a lot within the field of cardiology. Cardiology is an amazing field because they have so many great randomized control trials of all these different new medications, all these different new uses for SGLT2 inhibitors, and the 1% to 2% or whatever have you, absolute risk reduction for different medications, and how that is life-saving for a lot of our patients. However, I think about cardiology and I think about all of the profound disparity we see within patients. We know that minority patients receive worse care and worse outcomes in heart failure, in ACS, in cardiogenic shock. We know this to be true. If we diverted our research efforts and money and interest and priority to addressing that disparity, would that not have an equal or at least non-inferior impact on health in general, as much as an SGLT2 inhibitor would? Or maybe even more. And so my answer to that is, I think as a culture and a society, we need to shift our priorities. And that, yes, I understand that, right now with capitalism and the root of all evil, money needs to keep the lights on. But I think we need to shift. This is why my talk, I really wanted to call it a reckoning of our values, because I think we need to shift our values in determining really what is important. As a society and as physicians, we came into this field with the idea that we wanted to take care of people, and we want to improve the health for people. And there are many avenues to do that. And I think prioritizing those avenues will lead to greater dollars and greater investment in those activities as well.
That was very, very well said. I really appreciate that answer. Well, we are about 7 or so minutes to the hour, and so maybe we'll take the time to end a little bit early here for our Grand Rounds participants. Thank you all for coming to our last Grand Rounds of the academic year. Our talk will start back up again in September, and so we will see you all again with the new chief residents that are coming on soon at the end of the summer. And with that, I'll say have a good weekend and summer, everybody.